one of the questions I had for you was what inspired you to create Counting Coral?
Basically the way we approached the organization was if we show a picture of dead coral and live coral, no one really knows what the difference is and they can't distinguish the difference. So we ended up realizing that we needed an awareness driver that was slightly different and unique. And then we look at the dive industry of what the potential dives are, and you have drift diving, shark diving, cave diving, deep diving, shallow coral reef diving, and just maybe a couple others like night diving and stuff like that. So there wasn't really like a huge opportunity for, that awareness driver to be put into the ocean. In terms of like, if you said to a diver, when you dive on this site, pay attention, there's all this dead reef, right? But if I put in artwork, then I don't even have to pose that question. They look at it, they come up out of the water and they go, why is that there? And then we get that dialogue that we can open up that will then educate and drive that awareness outside of ourselves. So we are planning to put in 109 sculptures that is specifically designed for rare coral species to be planted on. And that helps protect those guys from predators and also helps them be in an area where when they reach natural maturity, they can spawn. And when they spawn, they will naturally propagate ecosystems without us really doing anything. So that's how that came about. We wanted to use art to drive awareness, but make it functional art that was really suited to this rare coral species that we're trying to save.
And so in these sculptures, the coral is planted on the sculpture, and then from what I got from your website, it's then moved to a second pod as a part of the cultivation process for the coral?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways we do it is when it reaches maturity, we want it to spawn. Now, coral, when it spawns, becomes really weak afterwards. And it takes a few weeks for those corals to kind of get their strength back before they go into the next cycle. And it's usually every year, once a year or once every full moon cycle. It depends on the coral species, to be fair. So what we want to do is we want to harvest those. As they get bigger and bigger, they'll outgrow the sculptures and then they become pretty large. But they're essentially a coral bank that we can now harvest more of those corals. So if you imagine a coral reef dying, and it dies off in vast numbers in very short periods of time. So if you imagine, just for argument's sake, that the size of a football pitch dies in 2 weeks. A couple of those guys survive. Now we go after those corals, because if we don't go after them, predators will, because essentially all their food sources just died. But there's a couple that have been left because they're genetically superior. They're that rare coral that we want to get after because they didn't die during a major stressing event. So we go after those guys, plant them, grow them to maturity. Now we have a safe coral we can harvest from, put onto secondary nurseries, or plant them back out onto the reef for restoration purposes.
Where do you see the Counting Coral program going in the future?
Well, that's the big box that we need to tick. So when we look at the larger picture, most countries in the G7 summit meeting committed to what's called a 30 by 30 program, which means 30% of land and 30% of oceans in their countries will be protected by 2030. Now, that's great on paper. And it's kind of like it's the appeasing comment that everybody, we'll do this, we'll do that. And granted, they could say under the guidelines that we've protected 30% of this marine environment. Now, the reality is it's not protected because there's no governing body, there's no police force, there's no boats going out there. They still sell the mining rights, they still sell the fishing rights, but they've just labeled it as a marine protected area. So what we want to do is create managed marine protected areas. And the beauty about what we do is as soon as we put our sculptures into the water, we have revenue streams and we become self-sufficient non-profits. But we can't do that under the guidelines of a marine protected area because anybody can come and dive on our sites at any time because we can't control the waters. Now, if we create a national park, we can. But then we have to negotiate the deals with the governments to say, hey, we want a 30-year concession on this national park, which means we control it. We've put the value into the ocean, which is the sculptures. So that's a huge value to the national park. Then we've added a revenue stream because we control the waters, we control every dive operator that comes in, and just like any other national park, they have to pay for entry. So we now control the revenue funnel, which goes into our organization to continue those educations, continue building sculptures. And the biggest box that this ticks is we're now creating larger and larger sculptural marine parks for 2, 3, 4 tank dives a day. You can do night dives, you can do 3 during the day. And we build out acres of beautiful, wonderful sculptural gardens. But the bonus is we're growing thousands and thousands of pieces of coral. Now, when you become a self-sustaining nonprofit, you can now allocate those funds for education programs, just for argument's sake, on another island next to your park. So you can go to those villages and say, hey, we have all the coral we can donate to you. We can do education programs for you because we now have the revenue to send people that can teach you about the coral, teach you how to protect your own environments. We give you the coral to plant out. And it's this beautiful cycle of revenue and coral and revenue and coral, and building up ecosystems instead of tearing them down. So the big picture of where we want to see ourselves in the next 5 years is creating national parks and marine protected areas as best as we can, and manage them under those concessions, and just create more and more life and education as we go along.
Can you talk a little bit about what causes coral to depreciate?
Yeah, so the breakdown of oceanic systems, we'll talk about coral slightly more specifically in a second. The breakdown of oceanic systems is basically carbon being pumped into the atmosphere, which we all have heard of global warming. But basically, when we trap heat into our atmosphere, it's kind of like a greenhouse effect, and they use those terminologies: global warming, greenhouse effect, climate change. Well, the oceans absorb 93% of that heat. It's the equivalent to 5 atomic bombs per second going off in the ocean in terms of energy that it absorbs. Then you have all the chemicals that are associated with carbon going into the atmosphere, that's then trapped into water molecules during storms and rains down what they used to term as acid rain, which they still kind of do. And I think one of the first indicators of that was in Italy, where the limestone that they were building, there were these beautiful cathedrals out of, started literally melting under the acid, because we have now these chemicals raining down on us. But it also goes into the ocean, which causes massive acidification of the ocean. So the main cause of coral death is the increased ocean temperatures. So if you remember 2 seconds ago, atmosphere heat is trapped, it's absorbed by the ocean. Well, those ocean temperatures are now rising. Coral reefs can only survive in tropical equatorial countries around 75 to 85 degrees. In the north of the Great Barrier Reef, they're now hitting record temperatures of 98 degrees to 100 degrees in the ocean. That's only 4 degrees cooler than the average hot tub temperature that you would go into a hot tub and enjoy yourself in. 104 is the average temperature for a public pool jacuzzi. So you can imagine that these temperatures are just destroying our ecosystems and our reef systems. And then you have the acidification that's melting the structures of coral. So corals are built up of calcium carbonate, or more correctly called aragonite. Well, it's a solid structure, much like your teeth. It's kind of a similar makeup of that structure. Well, it's gently melting that because of all the acid in the water, and it's melting the soft shell crabs, it's melting our soft corals, so it's really attacking those corals in that way. And then we have this huge predator problem. So when we have agriculture, and agriculture is one of the leading causes of climate change, breakdowns of our ocean systems, dead zones in our oceans, it's all from the consumption of meat. When all that agricultural runoff and chemical fertilizers that are sprayed on the crops go into our ocean systems, which is invariably going to happen. You spray chemicals on a crop and it rains, it goes into a little stream, tributary, river, ocean, ends up migrating throughout our entire ocean systems. That is now creating a huge food source for predators of coral, namely crown of thorns starfish is a huge problem in Australia, and they're actually paying people to go and kill them. And they're exploding in the numbers of the millions and millions of these things, and now crawling across all these already degraded reefs, and now they're actually going after the healthier coral and eating it all. So you've just got so many things that are assaulting coral right now. It's unbelievable. And in an actual fact, if you just fast forward 20 years, we've lost all of our coral on the planet. So what we're trying to do is just save very small pockets, because we know the inevitable is coming and we can't stop it. Now, if you speak to any marine biologist and scientist, they'll tell you the same thing. Australia is building a coral bank, a $284 million coral bank, to save all the coral species and house them in aquariums in this facility, in the hopes that when all those coral die, we have those strains available for future science to be able to populate those reefs back out in the future. So it's very dismal and it's not looking very good, but we have these small windows and these small opportunities to save very small pockets of coral in their natural ecosystems, alongside being housed in these coral banks. It's basically just general consciousness. You know, what we order from Amazon, what we consume, what we wear on our clothing. And we're not talking like, hey, we need to go back to the caveman style of just, you know, hunter-gatherer. We can mitigate all our problems by simple consciousness and simple living. In other words, consumerism is completely out of control. We don't need all the stuff that we have. We are quite capable of surviving with a couple t-shirts, a couple pairs of shorts. It doesn't have to be 100 pairs of shoes, 100 pairs of trousers, and you're washing them, and microfibers are going into our ocean, and all these various other complicated issues that goes along with it. We can live these normal, happy, healthy lives in moderation. And that's the key, is balance and moderation. Just don't go into the excess. Don't overconsume eating meat. Don't overconsume with plastic products. Don't overconsume with the clothing that you buy, the cell phones, the TVs. I mean, it's just, we're in this rampant, out of control, consumerism-based, lack of economy, I would say.
Yeah. Our planet needs time to heal, and if we don't give it that time, then, and we're overconsuming, then the planet doesn't have time to readjust itself to the way that we're living.
Yeah, and it's also like, just, you know, I think science is slightly behind what's happening. So the more science evolves and develops, we'll all be driving electric cars in probably 10 years. I mean, that's just the way it's going to go. You know what I mean? Now, are those electric batteries better than pumping CO2 into the atmosphere via coal mines? Yeah, 100%. But is it perfect? No. So we have to just go through the steps to get to perfection. And if we're all on board, we can all get there. But reality is not everybody's on board. No one really cares. There's a lot of people that just really don't care. It's just through lack of education and lack of mindfulness, you know.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I agree.
So,
and lack of empathy, too, is the big
It's
one.
a complete lack of empathy. The entire planet is ran by sociopathic maniacs because they have lack of empathy. They don't care about their fellow human beings. They're just after one thing, and that's money. So it's really hard to combat that when you've got all the top tier people that are sociopaths and narcissistic egomaniacs running the world, and it's all about money. You'll lose that game all the time. Yeah. But the consumer has a huge power. If we all stopped going to Starbucks and said, hey, you know, until you stop giving us plastic cups, we're never coming into your store, and Starbucks would shut down in 2 weeks because no one went there, guess what? They would flip that script immediately. They'd be producing plastic that's recyclable in a heartbeat, because money is involved. So when we understand as general individuals on this planet that we have the power to change everything for our future, we've just got to apply ourselves. That's huge win. But you got to tell at least 70% of the population stop going to Starbucks. I'm using Starbucks as an example. Sorry, Starbucks, but it could be McDonald's, it could be Shell gas station, it could be Chevron, it could be, you know, there's an oil spill and Chevron was directly responsible. Stop buying fuel there until they fix their problems, put all the money back in and clean up that environment. That's how individual powers can be expressed and flexed, but we choose not to do it. We just go in this mundane life. A lot of people are vastly asleep. Completely. They're not even functioning people. I call them the walking dead, because they are just literally going through life on a treadmill of routine, because it's the safest place to be. when you step outside of that routine, it's uncomfortable and fear can get a hold of you and disrupt your life. The fear-based place that you can be in is the best place that you can be in, because you are now reactive. You now have to think. You now have to decide decisions instead of this comfortable routinal life that you can rely on. The Simpsons every Thursday at 6 o'clock, or The Walking Dead on, Netflix at 3. I mean, we got to step out of this craziness.